Thank you very much. And thank you to everyone who has joined us. I'm just going to give a couple more minutes because we've got quite a few RSVPs, a little bit more than here. And to answer the question for Jack, if you're looking for the Permaculture Tasmania discussion on making permaculture stronger, yes, you are in the right place. Awesome. Okay, let me just click through. Now, if people are unfamiliar with Zoom, or at least in its webinar format, feel free to use the chat and discuss and talk amongst yourselves. What you're going to want to do, however, is use the drop down. It defaults to just all panelists, which is me and Dan, and we'll be talking, so we won't actually notice and we will miss your missives. So if you have to select as a drop down all panelists and attendees, and that will be yeah, then everyone will see it. Now, if you have questions, particularly for Dan, you will see at the bottom of the video screen a Q&A button, because if you just drop them in the chat, they'll go past and we'll miss them. But if you put them there, we will answer them on the video. Second, yes, Sarah. Hello again from there. Sarah was in a previous Zoom with me as well. Hello, hello again, second Zoom of the night. And if you're watching this on the replay, we do have a series of winter webinars at Permaculture Tasmania, so check the website or the Facebook page and you'll find the calendar for them. Awesome. Okay, well, we might as well get started. Let me just move this stuff around. Sorry about this. Second one of the night. So Dan, how are you? How's 2020 going?
Wow, 2020. Yeah. It's hard to find a descriptor, but I'm personally doing great right now. Yeah, everything is very well in my world.
Good. You I mean, you work from home as yourself, don't you? So
I do, yes. Yep.
When these last 3 months have been dramatic, but they could have been more dramatic, I guess.
Yeah. So personally, not a lot shifted.
Yeah.
We'll stop traveling around and spending more time together at home.
Well, that's actually, we should probably start off with a little bit of a bio. I've been, you've been on my podcast and I listen to yours avidly. But for people who maybe are unaware of yourself, you work from home in what capacity, Dan? Like, give us a brief bio of who you are.
Wow, this is, yeah. Who am I? So, actually, I've made a bit of progress on that because I could list off a whole lot of different projects and things. But underneath it all, I've been discovering over the years is a deep interest in the way humans create things, and the realization that the stuff we create, anything at all, can have more or less life. And I'm really interested in exploring the kinds of processes that bring more life into the world. So. That shows up in all kinds of things, like making permaculture stronger is nested within that exploration, and a whole bunch of other things like living. Some of them have got names like living design process and holistic decision making, and I'm part of a permaculture firm called Very Edible Gardens. All different legs on the same dog. And so I like, in terms of what I actually do, I run a podcast. I'm writing a couple of books. I do a lot of consultancy and education, including permaculture type process facilitation out on properties at the moment, ranging from one project in Melbourne, which is in a development, and a bunch of rural properties up to about 400 acres. Do quite a lot of supporting people to get clear on their intentions, and as they embark on larger complex projects. This year, I've even dabbled in a little bit of conflict mediation, which has been fun. So the weeks are diverse and interesting, and I guess I'm a creative sort of a person, always starting new things.
Yeah, sure.
And always learning, genuinely curious. How's that? Is that enough of a?
No, it's good. It's good. I mean, the reason I wanted to tee it up is because you are closer to the kind of like the classical world of permaculture design, if we can say such a thing. Like there are different disciplines and modes that we can bring to prioritizing and working out how we exist in a place, right? So but just in general, one of the things I was thinking of, and you mentioned some rural properties there, I'm more familiar with the US numbers because of my day job, but how how have the last few months been, as far as you're aware, in the kind of world of professional permaculture design? Is there a change in the demography of tree changes and so on in Australia? I mean, typically the classic permaculture client is someone moving out of the city onto an urban or a rural or peri-urban block in a tree change capacity. So sometimes they're early retirees or so on. Are you aware of if people are doing this at a younger rate or an increased rate, for instance, at the moment?
Well, one thing I haven't swapped notes with a lot of design colleagues around the world on this particular topic, but one thing I can speak to in my own experience is that there's been an uptick in people that have been dancing with the idea, and sometimes quite seriously holding the idea of a tree change at some point. They've promoted that idea to the top of the stack, and so they're moving on it. And yeah, it seems like the whole time of COVID has really prompted that.
Yeah, it's one of the things that it kind of calls you to sit with, isn't it? Which is like, what do I want to do with my life? It's a very Carol question. It's been my experience with the membership associated with my show as well, that there are people who have always been interested in it, and this has given them an urgency is almost it's the right word, but it's not the complete word. Like they've a new sense of urgency, or even a realization of why aren't I doing this? Why aren't I doing
Totally.
this now?
Yeah. And I was really delighted and surprised to find layers of that in my own life too. It's like, what the hell were we doing beforehand? Like, why were we driving around so much? Why were we putting all this effort into, all these things that we can choose not to do? And realizing that the layers and layers of things that we just kind of do habitually, we just get sucked into the rut of normality. And so it's been as I know a lot of people have been talking about this, as well as the darkness and the tragedy and crisis. There's been a lot of an opportunity for reflection and pattern interrupt. And oh shit, this is it. This is life, and we got choices. And normal isn't as solid as I thought it might have been. And time to make some decisions and shift things up.
Well, it seems like, and that's a really good intro into the next part of the discussion. It seems, maybe putting it this way, it should be that permaculture is absolutely the thing for this present moment. And the idealized version of it that maybe we both want it to be in different ways is absolutely the right thing for this moment. But it's not quite it's not the standalone solution it needs to be for this moment, or it isn't the one thing that's required. And I guess it's kind of, we were just talking about designers and so on. If it's a thing for this moment, one of the things I've noticed in this volunteer capacity for Permaculture Tasmania is that there are more stakeholders in the permaculture world than I thought there initially were. So I'm a permaculture designer, at least certified, in the sense that I've done the several-week course, and apparently that qualifies me to recommend, large scale earthworks and all that kind of stuff, right? So I'm what you might call an expert. We walk the walk down here, but I do have the certificate. And I look at the people who come to the events, like we did David's events for Retro Suburbia. I ran them for Launceston and Hobart down here.
Okay, yep.
And the people who came to that were very different. And they weren't permaculture designers, but they were interested. They're like, I want to be about this world. I'm not sure what this world is. So there are kind of different stakeholders in it that I think I'd want to ask how you kind of describe them for yourself, because if we're going to talk about permaculture for this moment, I hope you and I can get into the weeds of some of the theory, which was what we're going to discuss tonight in terms of making permaculture stronger. But it's almost like before we get there, we want to specify that some of what we discuss will be inside baseball, because permaculture has different stakeholders, I think.
Yeah, for sure. I'm starting to pay more attention to the different, nodes or clusters of stakeholders, that people that are interested, and noticing. I haven't articulated this clearly before, but I could roll out a few patterns I've seen. One that I've been noticing recently is there's a subclass of people interested in permaculture that sometimes some of them did a PDC. Well, I mean, I remember some of them I've met have done a PDC with Bill a long time ago, but they've bumped into to permaculture a fair way back, and they've kind of had this on-off relationship with it. And sometimes they've had a sense of, for whatever reason, not wanting to jump in fully, and often they're at a retiring age now, and in some cases they're finding making permaculture stronger as a kind of an inroad, and wanting to. Maybe they and now they're looking back at their life and thinking, oh, I should have, I regret not dipping in earlier, and so there's that class. There's the young earnest folk, in their 20s, early 30s, whatever, that are involved in the shifting culture of the times we find ourselves in, and just really hungry for quality learnings and philosophies and practical skills in the region of regenerative, transformative stuff, that kind of thing. So there's that aspect. There's I'd say there's a bunch of people in permaculture that love it, identify with it, don't design professionally, but use it in a gardening sense, and for whom it's a large part of their social identity, enjoy the events and the groups and the gatherings, and part of that really important aspect of permaculture, which is home scale resilience. Then there's of course the people that are designing at a professional level, which is a surprisingly small subset of everyone who's into permaculture. They can be a little thin on the ground. There's a much greater subset of people that are teaching permaculture educators. Those are a few of the groups that come to mind.
The household resilience thing, or almost like urban or suburban homesteading, is sort of the core of the membership, or an event attendees down here, as you would expect, right? And that's kind of been interesting for me, because I very much like the theory of it, and permaculture as an epistemology or a way of understanding and being in the world. But there's this great chunk of people that are, I'm thinking of Tasmania, right, that will actually shop at farmers markets on the weekend and are extremely interested in optimizing their home garden setup. So they'll do food swaps and so on, and that for them is permaculture, and that seems to be the biggest group. So I have a question for you, which I don't think anyone's, as far as I can tell, has asked you, because it's a lead up from that, based on the name of the show, and even more like the name of the project, Making Permaculture Stronger. What's already strong in permaculture?
One thing that's I don't think anyone has ever asked this question. One thing that's strong in permaculture is and thinking about where it comes from, I think it comes from Bill Mollison's incredible ability to deeply inspire people with an invitation into a different way of being, and the concept that we know enough, we just need to start applying it. And that's often the profound epiphany or realization or insight that people come at on a PDC. And so I think that's strong. Well, that's a really powerful, strong part of permaculture. Something else that I would say is strong is the size and I guess the strength of the people that organize events around permaculture. And also my sense is that something that's quite strong is permaculture's ability to be pushing itself out on its periphery in terms of letting other people know about it. So probably the wrong turn of phrase to call it permaculture's marketing division, but its ability to communicate to people outside of permaculture and invite them in. I feel like that's a place that's strong, and that's one of the reasons I'm not personally drawn to contributing to that really important aspect of permaculture. I'd say it's also strong in terms of I'd say kind of intellectual leadership, particularly at this moment with David Holmgren having over the last decade more stepped into or back into the role of playing a leadership and an eldership role. And I think that's something that really gives permaculture strength. I'd say there's
And
a lot of, what's that? Jump in, yeah.
Well, I think that's it, exactly right, and also the repositioning of that, of his considerable experience and philosophy and intellect and tactics behind the sort of broader retro suburbia project, because it kind of comes back to most of the people I encounter in PT, and it's what you said, right? Permaculture is really good at empowering people. We know what to do. And it's really interesting watching the local groups and people just take that extra step and realizing that they either know it. It was fun talking to people after the Launceston event. Tasmania, when it comes to retro suburbia, is quite unique in Australia because it already has the highest percentage of people who have fruit trees in their backyards and all the rest of it, because that never went away from like the early 20th century. We never had an urbanization or suburbanization moment that eradicated that. So it's really interesting to see people realize that they're empowered to take the next step beyond shopping at a farmer's market and doing a seed exchange or whatever it happens to be with neighbors and interesting people. And I think permaculture, and that, like, David's kind of caught lightning, or really caught the current with that, because it's in that location that I think I know that's why you did it. The biggest material uplift can happen because most people live in those contexts and are looking at those things.
Yeah, for sure. It brings to mind, I put together a little a framework, or different levels at which someone can engage in permaculture, and none of them are better or worse or whatever. They just are what they are. And I use the metaphor of give someone a fish, teach them to fish, and then develop that a bit further. But yeah, at the level of, you can seed swap, or I can have a chicken tractor in my backyard, or whatever it is, plant some comfrey under some apple trees. There was like the idea of giving someone a fish, and that's often the entry point into permaculture. Is you learn about or see or pick up on some cool strategies and techniques that you could do, and they're tangible and practical, and you can understand them straight away and apply them, which is a really important aspect of the whole thing. And yet, of course, we're yet to get onto ways that where it's not so strong that we can be, that it will be a shame if that's where it stayed in the realm of permaculture is a bunch of handy strategies and techniques.
I remember when you came on my show, I think it was in that you characterized permaculture as a design science without a theory of design. And it's also, but it's also, when you're just talking about those practical things, it is practice without theory, and without a theory of theory and practice, which I'm very interested in, right? So I'm gonna, because we asked like what's already strong in permaculture, and typically I'm sure you get asked the opposite of that, but I'm gonna ask it in a very Carolish way, right? Which is where are permaculture's weak spots and where are its opportunities, and are they different or the same? Do you see what I mean?
Let's see if I see what you mean as I unpack that. So where are permaculture's weak spots?
Weak points, yep. And where are its opportunities, and are they different things?
Oh, right. Yeah. Well, I mean, I've been through an experience, this Making Permaculture Stronger project, which is a blog and a podcast, it's recently commenced its second phase. And the first phase was looking at the same things and treating them as weak points. And the second phase was rethinking, relabeling, kind of training my mind to look at the same things, and rather than seeing them as weak points that I want to get rid of, or problems I wanted to solve, seeing them as opportunities, which really excites me. And so rather than, there's all these things wrong with permaculture that I'm worried about and I think we should fix, it's like, wow, permaculture is young and there's all these incredibly exciting potentials and opportunities that I'm really excited to bring a positive energy to, rather than this is energy of like, kicks ass, permaculture is fantastic, let's make it even more kick-ass, and let's find where those edges are, those opportunities, those nodal intervention points to bring a bit more careful and run with those and work with those. So I see them as different, quite significant. I actually see them these days as looking at the same things through the lens of a different paradigm.
Yeah, I like that. Okay, it's an attitude that is already improving, right? Because there's nothing permaculturists like more, except possibly herb spirals, than complaining about permaculture. So That's kind of like, funny enough, baked into the culture of it, is to point out its own shortcomings. And it's funny, it sort of begs the question, maybe I'll turn it into a real question before we start talking about things like Carol and whatever. Carol Sanford's work's been very important to you and the blog and so on. It's really interesting stuff when it's applied to many of the opportunities we're discussing. But do you think permaculture has historically had an inability to update itself? And does it still have that? Or has it at least struggled with it? Do you know what I mean?
Good question. Yeah. I feel very confident saying yes, it struggled with it. I mean, it's very interesting for me to think back. One thing I've done recently, and people might be interested to hear, that in the next month or two, 3 at the outside, I'll start releasing a series of interviews with David Holmgren, where he kindly shares in quite some depth his journey with permaculture's inception. And we're looking at through a design process lens. But anyway, I've been getting a bit more familiar with some of the details of that, and the way it played out, as a lot of people know, is out of this kind of intensely productive 2-year collaboration between Bill Mollison and David Holmgren, after which Bill Mollison, I mean, he was continuing to develop the ideas, one of the culminating products being the designer's manual. A huge part of what he was doing was using his incredible ability and holistic ecological way of seeing to inspire people and fire people up, and in a way challenge people to explore this stuff. Whereas David retreated more to get more hands-on experience, and for a long time was a very a background, gentle, soft-spoken presence, where it was he that was asking the difficult questions, but was more in the background. And even though he published a surprising amount of stuff on all this, it's pretty much invisible. You have to dive through his collected writings to find. I basically never find anyone who's actually read much of that stuff. And apart from that, I'd say the main emphasis has been on exploring the practical bits and pieces and sharing it. And one pattern I've noticed is that with respect to some of the core components or aspects of permaculture, like design, it's, if nothing else, it's a conscious design approach. That's mostly the same ideas have mostly been repeated decade after decade after decade, without occasionally there's been quite a big jump, like Dave Jackie realized there was a gap, so he did some work on it, and other authors like Ben Falk and so on. But generally, my sense has been, the feeling has been, we've pretty much got that sewn up, so let's just repeat the same stuff and maybe reword it. Which I think has been or has the risk of becoming a significant shortcoming. That
and is that because there's sort of like an apostolic challenge, right? Which is however much people on an individual basis can do what was always in kind of like the promise of Bill's approach, which is to evolve with your system. The sad reality is, well, not even sad, the operational reality is the system of certification is a return to the principles as found in Bill's big book, right? And so even as the decades moved on, I think it seems like there's an apostolic challenge where that process, and the book is amazing, it's life-changing. Everyone remembers the first time they've read it. Like, they're like, what is this? Everyone should have this. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm,
but in terms of how permaculture evolves, it just seems to me that that's been one of its challenges, that every person who encounters permaculture, and beyond the level of growing a few extra things in their garden, kind of has to go through the whole evolutionary history of the movement. So they actually kind of have to begin in like the hills above Hobart and go out and go through the decades. And that's why I think we get things like cob pizza ovens and herb spirals everywhere we go, because you almost have to have a microcosm of permaculture's entire journey before you turn around. And I feel like that's been that's kept it in a loop, has been my experience. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I can relate to that. Yeah, I mean, I think the brilliance of the designer's mail, it's a double-edged thing, and it's kind of can have an intimidatingly kind of complete sense of completeness to it, perhaps, or something like that, or would anyone dare to kind of continue evolving the ideas or critique and develop them. So, yeah, maybe that's part of it.
Yeah, I think so anyway, an apostolic bit. But
Yeah.
and it's really interesting to see the kind of almost like different lineages evolving in their own separate ways, right? But the one that was most expansionist is the one that has this return to principles, even if one of those principles itself is about evolving with the system and modifying. And it's just been it comes back to that classic problem-solving challenge of you can't fix a problem with the same thinking that caused it, right? So, and this is what is so interesting about the podcast, and we'll talk about Carol's work in a minute, is you have to, even if you return to this way of thinking, there needs to be, I guess, what Carol has an emphasis on disruption, right? So you actually need to have a thing that can move you out of that patterning. But I mean, maybe it's worth for people, I know a lot of them are listen to the show already, but like, do you want to give a brief overview of Carol Sanford's work as it pertains to your current project and so on?
Yeah. So Carol Sanford is this incredibly deep, profound, and clear thinker. She's almost 80. I'd say almost certainly the deepest, fastest, clearest thinker in the moment that I've ever come across. And she's been working with the concept of regeneration in a conscious way for about 40 years or 47 years or something, for a long time, coming up 50 years. So she's got some runs on the board and come a long way with it. And she stewards a school or an approach that's been around for a long time. So it's not something she came up with. She had mentors and they had mentors. And she uses this approach called living systems thinking. And core to it is this idea of regeneration, where regeneration is always about disrupting or blowing off the superficial fluff of something and getting back to the core of it, and then rebuilding fresh tissue from there. And she walks that talk. So the first time I met her, I don't know, episode 19 or something on the Making Permaculture Stronger podcast, she was doing that with me. Whenever she detected any certainty or picked up that maybe I was thinking or coming from levels lower than a regenerative approach, she would, before I'd even finish a sentence, she would use the words I was speaking to track the ideas I was speaking from, and consciously disrupt them and shock me and purposely take me into a state of like, what the hell is even happening here, out of my comfort zone. And I've seen her do that repeatedly with a lot of other people. And there's so she's a force of nature and someone I'm taking a lot of inspiration from. And yeah, as you've alluded to, one way I think of it at the moment is that I was kind of fumbling my way in certain directions and having certain realizations in terms of my relationship to permaculture and what Making Permaculture Stronger was all about. And she's just brought a huge amount of clarity and nuance and let me language and communicate some of what's going on, a lot more successfully.
Do you think, I mean, is it fair to say, because I remember in the earlier episodes, and it's not that you've moved away from this, like they were very heavily reliant on Christopher Alexander's understanding of design, right? And that's cool. There's really, really good stuff there. Mm-hmm. Do you think, or maybe it's my impression from the outside, that one of the things the process of engaging with Carol's ideas has done is kind of situated in a more Heideggerian sense of, because I think we discussed it, like solving the design science challenge isn't a complete solve unless you realize that that's a subset of how one lives or how one dwells, right? Because the notion, this is kind of like theory, the idea of theory and practice is itself a theory that you put into practice. And until and Carol's quite good, I think, at least in the episodes I've heard, of getting to that meta level of realizing that there are some embedded cart ruts in our thinking, right? And you kind of have to bounce out of them. But that, I think that's been an interesting process of, because permaculture talks that talk, but it doesn't necessarily walk the walk of being embedded in living. I don't even like the word systems, right? Like being embedded in living context, because it relies on that kind of empirical and science-based framework that it sort of came from to measure it, even if it's trying to get out of it, right? You know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, no, I think so. I think, well, some stuff comes up for me as you say that. I mean, a big part of what I think Carol communicates powerfully is that it's no small thing to reactivate the latent ability all humans have and had and have largely lost to see life at work. You know, to see living system as whole and alive and evolving in a way that's not completely just sliced up and fragmented by a lot of the ideas we're socialized into that are fragmentary, and meaning we just can't see processes and all that. And I think, you know, we can go to a PDC and kind of have this epiphany and then walk out of it thinking we're done. You know, like we got it, we got the idea, and now we can see living systems and interact with them and be embedded in them. One thing Carol points out is like, you know, this is a multi-decade thing of kind of re-evolving our minds and our way to think and our languaging. It's not a short-term thing, and we need to be constantly regenerating ourselves in our ways of thinking, which means constantly disrupting and going back, and to think you can read one book or do one course or whatever, and then you've got a solution you can reapply. You're kind of missing something pretty fundamental.
I think so. So one of the ideas, which I'll get you to describe in a minute, I think is very, very useful. And it's just tailor-made for permaculture, but it also takes on a different context in our current situation, right? Which is Carol's idea of nodal engagement. So do you want to like talk about what that is, and also what that might look like in a changed context of this kind of like post-COVID world, right?
Yeah, I can say a little bit about it. I'm still very much, I'm realizing over time that I've noticed I've grabbed certain of Carol's ideas and thought that I got them quite quickly, and realizing, oh God, that it's more nuanced and complex than that. But so initially I thought of nodes, because she does use the metaphor or the idea of an acupuncture point, you know, places where energies come together and you can make an intervention, what she calls a nodal intervention, in a way that catalyzes a phase change across the whole system. And so this idea of nodal intervention is at a higher level, a more regenerative level than the idea of leverage, which is ultimately a mechanical concept. You still get hopefully a decent bit of bang for your buck by using a lever, but it's when you get to a nodal intervention, the idea is even a tiny application of energy and information at the right time in the right place in a system can flip the whole system in ways that leave leverage or prioritization or the idea of scaling behind. And I'm learning more as I go along that initially you think, oh yeah, so nodes, you know, like buds on an apple tree or something. We just look for the nodes and we figure out which one to make an intervention in. But I'm learning more that she actually means it in a more subtle and dynamic sense than that. It's not like it's not necessarily a physical spot, but you can look for nodal intervention possibilities, which are dynamic. And I mean, they might be coming in and asking a question in a certain way, and just realizing that there are places we can learn to see in a system, and that if we can go in there and affect change, that the impact can be quite extraordinary. And like one of the examples that's given is when they dropped the wolves back into Yellowstone, and it supported the whole ecology to elevate to a whole new level of expression once again.
And unanticipated, like it wasn't, and that's, I like that about it. It's sort of, there's a echo in something Bill said about New Guinean gardeners, which is that, you know, Western farmers will expend 20 units of energy to bring in 2 units of energy of food, right? But a New Guinean gardener will expend 2 units of energy to sort of go out into you can't even really call it a garden in that everything garden sense, and return with 20 units of energy. So who's the more successful agronomist, right? And it's how you interact with the system that leads to the indescribable, from our perspective, uplift of the whole thing. And that is that's observed in permaculture. It's just not described in a way that is easily replicable. Like the stories of people who do it for long enough know that. Like Jeff Lawton says, let the system complicate itself, which is not exactly nodal intervention, but it also isn't not, right? Because it's just find the places where the least amount of effort leads to the greatest, like energy in leads to the greatest amount of energy out. And it's so it has the resonance of something that's like metaphysically true. It's not like a tactic for a garden, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. 100%. Yeah, I'm so much. My sense is so much of what Bill Mollison was doing was working nodally. I might just mention that the idea of a nodal intervention is one of what Carol calls the 7 first principles of regeneration. And one point she makes about that, she says she learned it from her like half Native American grandfather, but that these were things that healthy, intact human beings, like indigenous peoples the world over, were doing all the time simultaneously. And I have no question about that. Like thinking about Aboriginal Australians, they were operating in a way she would have called nodal, with the way that the fires were introduced into the system at the right time and the right way to shift the whole lot up and maintain those complex mosaics.
And even because that's a go-to example. One of the ones that haunts me, because like that, I use that concept of mutual flourishing, which is a very Aboriginal idea, is East Coast mobs building watering holes for kangaroo specifically. And it's not even like as a trap for them or as a way to grow their numbers, but because it's an intervention that improves the entire system if there's like a reliable access to water. And that way of thinking, because we live in a civilization that destroyed it multiple centuries ago, it takes a while there's some training wheels that are required, right? And I think that's what I like about it's what I like and dislike, not that I dislike it. Carol's corporate career means that some of the words are still almost like this is unfair, and I don't only half mean this, like corporate redescriptions of an animist cosmology, right? And I say that not as a reason to avoid it, but as a reason to actually go towards it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and she's not on the surface with the books and stuff. She doesn't go a lot into the lineages she's working from. And I think one of her gifts is that she's able to communicate these really ancient and sometimes quite esoteric ideas in the most seemingly accessible and practical ways. So I'm finding that as I start to work with them, like I've been working with their ideas consciously for a year or so, and I feel like I'm just things are really starting to come together in the moment.
Funnily enough, it's an animist trick, right? So if you are outside a cosmology and you're dealing with a particular elder, so I do work with Shipibo in the Amazon and so on, but you will get a different version of a story from an elder to another person because the intervention is you specific, and if you got the whole thing or if you got their version of it, it wouldn't work quite so well. And I noticed that in Carol's approach, which is it's not as clunky as saying hiding the kids' vegetables in their food, but it's you'll get the kind of interface of the story or the message that is right for that moment, and that itself is that kind of thinking.
100%. Yeah. That's one thing that blows me away, is that she's embodying it in the moment. I've never heard her talk about anything that I haven't experienced her doing, and she's very much with someone. She does these things called fish bowls, where she works one-on-one with someone for an hour and just disrupts the living crap out of them. Just wipes the floor with them. A bit like, even much more extreme than what she did on my first interview with her, where I didn't know what I was getting myself into. But they come out shining and learn a lot, and she's very conscious of who is this individual, unique person, and where are they, and how can I disrupt their certainty and just sort of stay just ahead of them and keep them in this space of like, oh God, I thought I knew what I was doing with this project, and you've just pulled out the rug from under me, and keep them in this painful place where others might come in to try and rescue them and give them the answer, and she'll get that energy out of the way, like this idea of in a sense retraining us to think, that just even that whole idea that she refers to David Bohm's distinction between thinking and thoughting. So much of what we call thinking is thoughting, which is we're just rehashing thoughts we've had previously, or often that we never even got to. We've just inherited, and I'd say a lot of permaculture, theory or whatever is thoughting. We're just rehashing the same old stuff rather than thinking and generating, which is when is when you're generating new thoughts that maybe haven't been around before.
Yeah, the founder of Chaos Magic, Pete Carroll, I'm paraphrasing, but he says an idea can move from book to book without any intervening thought.
Exactly, 100%. That's
and,
great. I should write that down.
And that's permaculture to a T. Like the amount of courses and books that are out there that are that have had ideas move from one book to another that, with the saying it nicely, don't actually work.
Yeah.
Like, all right, and that's the thinking and thoughting. So Steve's got a question which I think we should mention at this point, because I've listened to all the Carol episodes, which is what is a good book or books to start with? I'll jump in and say listen to all her appearances on your show so far, from the earliest to the most recent, because she's been on a couple of times, hasn't she?
That's right. Yeah. And she's coming back in August to take us through the seven first principles, which would be great. But she's written about 5 books. I've only engaged with 3 of them. The most recent is The Regenerative Life, which is a pretty I think great place to start to launch into Carol world. It's written for human beings and goes through these 9 nodal regenerative roles, but she also lays out the 4 levels of paradigm that she took us through in my last podcast. That's a great place to start if you're interested in the application of her stuff in a business context. She's got a book that came out in 2017 called The Regenerative Business, which I'm also getting a lot out of, and also has a lot of ideas that are a lot more widely applicable than just business. But yeah, either of those, The Regenerative Life and or The Regenerative Business, are a really great place to start. And they're very tight, clearly written books that you can kind of read through. Well, my experience is I read through and then think, okay, I need to go through again and make notes. And she invites she's the only person I've had a lot of people suggest the benefit of a daily journaling process, as a self-reflection thing to grow your own thinking capacity. She's the only person that has helped it stick. So for a little while now, I've been each day trying to choose one of her frameworks and apply it to things that are happening to the day or to this permaculture project or whatever.
Cool. So is there something for people who are coming at this cold? Is there something kind of like immediately or urgently, if there was to be? It's challenging with a thinker like Carol. This is the only stuff I know is from listening to her on your show and then finding a few other instances of her talks and interviews on the internet. Is there like one thing that you want people to take away as a first step, or is there one insight that you've derived from Carol that you would like to see more than any others kind of applied in permaculture land?
I think the most relevant insight that I've learned from Carol that's particularly relevant to permaculture is this idea of moving from a problem mindset to a potential mindset. Like, I'll give you a simple example. We ran a permaculture design course end of last year, and I run it with my co-director Adam Grubb, and we split the group, and I take a group of participants to usually quite a complex rural property. This was like 70 acres. There was lots of erosion and hills, and it was really complicated. And the first day I didn't make it, so they went out and they came back, and I said, "Tell me about the property." And they're all like, "Oh my God, we can't do this project." There was this. They told me about the erosion, and there was these trees that were being ring barked, and there was no water, and the people didn't know enough to make this. They just gave me a big list of problems, and I smiled. And we went back together the next day. And I don't know if it was me or whatever, but they started to see the potential of the place, and left. The energy was entirely different, and you can see how it's very easy as a permaculture designer to approach things in that way. Okay, we've got to look at what are your issues with water, what are your issues with fire, what are your issues with soil, and then the process can be how do we solve all these problems. Whereas Carol points out that ultimately that's a bit of a deflating strategy, because if your process is oriented towards solving problems, the best possible outcome is that they've all gone away. So your energy is all about reducing things, making less of things, making things go away. And at the end of it all, you're left with the absence of all these things you started with, as opposed to moving into potential, where you can still negotiate and deal with these same things, these same issues, but in a way where your eye is like, what's possible here? What's the potential of this place and these people and them together? And how can we start to tease that out and be in support of that? Yeah,
it's excellent, right? Because there's a kind of entropic limitation to the permaculture approach, of looking for where the challenges are, and it reminds me that, and this is the sort of machine thinking, right? It reminds me almost of like a checklist before an airplane takes off. So you hit a property and go this, and as you say, it caps the energy of it, and it doesn't kind of pivot to it. And ultimately, if you were to solve one thing, it would be jumping back to the people who are going to be custodians of it and go and solve why they think the challenge is a collection of solutions rather than a journey towards flourishing, right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, let's measure one other insight. I mean, you'll just stop me, they'll start flying soon, but she's really great at emphasizing the pitfalls of what she calls the expert model. And so she's really helped enrich. I was already on this trajectory, but rather than being the permaculture design expert who comes in and tells people what to do with their land and their lives, which was all too easy to do in the past, getting out of that whole mindset where I'm more focused on how can I build capacity? How can I support the people I'm working with to build and evolve and grow their own capacity to read their own landscape and to understand their intentions more deeply and clearly, and start to take steps towards realizing whatever they're there to realize and whatever the land's saying it wants to realize. Where I'm resourcing them, I'm educating them, but I'm not playing the expert game in a way that is kind of taking away the journey for them. Yeah, that's been handy.
Are you seeing more of that, or hearing, because I kind of am, like hearing more chat around people who do this as a professional design thing? Because the bill approach, and again, it's amazing, but it does presuppose that the best life that you want is the one that kind of he wrote that whole book to get you, right? So like homesteading with, shall we say, 85% food self-sufficiency. Maybe you're creating your own biogas, like if if you need a hobby, but it doesn't, the system as it is excellent at achieving that one goal. But if that isn't your goal, if the off-the-shelf one isn't there, often I think when people move, because I've done it a bunch of times, so have you, why are you tree changing? And how can I help you experience the thing that you are looking for, either faster or better or clearer, and rather than put the orchard over there,
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, one place Carol's thinking has evolved my approach, because I've gotten to the point where I don't want to fall into the trap of people. Well, I say, what do you want? They say, well, we want permaculture. I need more. I can't just give you permaculture. We want permaculture from you. Do what you do. So they're inviting me to do what I would do if it's my place, but it turns out it's their place and I'm not them. So whatever I suggest isn't going to work. So I got to the point where, and I initially inspired by Alan Savory, in his holistic management, I developed holistic decision making as a way of helping people tell me what they want, which is a lot easier said than done, harder done than said. And with Carol, I'm moving even further, which is she says, don't be limited by what people tell you what they want, by what people tell you they want. Yeah, and focus more on who are these people, and having developed some degree of, the idea is that we develop some degree of skill at actually reading people and reading landscape. Who is this place? Who are these people? And what potential do I see? And how do I start to support that potential to tease it out, to express itself in a way that brings the place, the people, the whole situation more alive? And a huge part of this way of thinking is, and also infuses the larger systems that this place is nested within, with value and life as well.
Yeah. Well, that was going to be the next part, right? Because from an animist perspective, like the definition of animism that we use on the show and with the membership is extending the notion of personhood out beyond the human. In a materialist European context, human and person are the same thing, but nowhere else in the world is that the case. So that trees are persons and all the rest of it. So one way or the other, it seems like and even if people don't feel comfortable using these terms, whatever, it seems like it's discovering a sense of custodianship for like the clients, the new people, like finding their way to what that is. And also, and I mean this as literally as any animist would, I guess, also what country wants to do, right? Like, so what is the nested context of ecological flourishing, psychological, cultural flourishing, the entire thing. And that is part of it's, I joke about it with the members and the listeners to the show, like permaculture has a principle of people care, right? Well, I think things other than humans are persons. So you kind of get stuck. you can kind of sneak some animism into the system and go, well, if we're prioritizing for people care, that includes endemics on the property, and that includes all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Nice one.
So you go.
No, that was going to be.
Oh, I was going to say, yeah, I'm enjoying this invitation to always think at least 3 levels of nestedness. So, you know, in the past, I'd be just focused on the property or something, but now thinking, what are the nests here? How are they organized? So am I seeing the people as nested within this property, as nested within the larger watershed or life shed? And how can I interact with and be involved in a way that's I'm conscious of the impacts on all 3? And also this idea that over time, often at the beginning, I mean, particularly in a permaculture context, people are pretty focused on themselves, on their property, and we want to get ourselves up and running. But over time, and that's great and important, but over time, if you can build a sense of will around, we can do all that, and we can have our little patch and our orchard and our this, in a way that also benefits the wider system, that's incredibly fulfilling. Yeah. You know, the sense that you're making a positive contribution to systems beyond yourself, and that's eminently possible. And of course, that idea is implicit in so much of what permaculture is all about.
Yeah, but it isn't. It's insufficiently centered. I think this is the key to it. Have you had? Because I'll give you a story of being on ayahuasca in the jungle last year in a minute, because it goes directly to that.
I'll look forward to that.
But have you had? Have you had any clients push back? Because I'm in a similar, I don't do it as in a permaculture context or anything, but have you had people who you've led through the process of kind of like opening up to themselves and actually what it is they want and who they are? Have you had any of them just go, no? Because when you allow people to be what I think the natural mode of a human is to be a custodian and is to be in a state of mutual flourishing. I've never encountered someone who withdraws from that. It's more about that permaculture empowering thing of letting people know it's okay to not just want that, but to be it, right? Do you find that people like, do you get pushback, or do you find the opposite, that people open up and it is like transformative?
Well, it's the whole gamut. I work with so many different people. And one way I think about it is my underlying understanding of what I'm actually doing, even though often there are bulldozers involved and dams and roads and trees and all that stuff, is that I'm supporting them to take steps back to life, to coming back to life and being alive, fully alive, where I think that that's mostly latent in us these days. And so there is a lot of meeting people where they're at, not coming in and saying, you know, it's my way or the highway. You have to go really hard, and we have to do this full deep process on who you really are. And I need you to think about how you're contributing to the wider systems from the beginning. So I tend to meet, I don't tend to get a lot of pushback because I'm flexible, and so long as I get a sense that I'm nudging people a little bit. I'm a lot more gentle in my disruption than Carol is. It's all good. I mean, I can remember one project where, even though it seemed like a good fit at the start, it turned out these particular people really just wanted a master plan, and which is fine. And we figured that out, and they got one from someone else because it's not a game I play anymore, But it's like it's not. There's nothing. Exactly. It's fine. Yeah, I work in a certain way, and one thing I'm finding more and more is the way I'm working. I'm using this phrase "living design process." Like the way I explain it to people, and which I think is accurate, is that what I'm talking about is a process that really authentically honors who you are, honors what this place is, and supports you to, in an iterative, unfolding, alive way, to make the best possible decisions you could, then make a step, and then kind of rinse and repeat in a way that will take you to the reliably and rigorously to the best possible outcomes in which you're the most fulfilled and happiest and the land is the healthiest. So people are like, okay, yep. So where do we sign? That sounds sounds
that. Well, I you can kind of intellectually understand it, and then so one of the experiences that I did a full ayahuasca dieta last year in the jungle with Terence McKenna shaman, like the whole half bowl of rice, isolation, the whole thing, right? And after one of the ceremonies one evening, just sort of as it was coming down kind of off it, and we're still in the Maloka, I became aware that the entire jungle was aware of me and us there, but also wanted us. The thing humans are supposed to do is to be in ceremony as a mutual flourishing exchange. It's a thing that humans can do that a river and a toad can't. And so we do that. And it was the whole thing. It was the Shipibo musicians, and it's kind of coming back to what you said before, that you realize you might start off with here are my zones, his zone 1 and here's my no dig garden and here's zone 2 and my polyculture swales and whatever. And then you suddenly realize that you are in this wider context, and you just need to, I've only been down here a couple of years, but you just need to watch the birds fly on and off your property to go, wait a minute, they are not respecting the legal boundaries of this bit of land I bought in. And once you kind of realize that that's what you're embedded in, and that humans have an ability to do things that a black cockatoo can't, which is pick the right kind of endemics for your seasonal creek so that the frogs can grow, and we do that and we get more frogs. And it's not permaculture at that point. It's just being a good citizen of the universe. And I think that it's always been the dance with permaculture. People go into it and feel that sense of being a good citizen of the universe behind it, and it just doesn't click right. Does that make sense?
100%. It so makes sense. Like I've just come across so many people along the way. Often I've given talks on this kind of stuff, and they'll come up and they'll say, thanks, but when I did my PDC, I felt that compelling invitation and the possibility of being a good citizen of the universe, of becoming re-enmeshed in and aware of and tuned into and resonance with the ecologies and the communities I'm part of, and like contributing to the health of the ecosystem in ways that provide for human needs locally and all that stuff. It's really compelling and exciting. And then I went and I finished the course, and I went home and I dug the swale like it said, and I did this and this and this. And I don't know, there was there was some sense of disconnect there. And that's a huge part of what my understanding of what I'm exploring is, why does there need to be a disconnect? And what to me, a lot of what it comes down to is the design processes and creation processes we use default back to reductionistic, mechanistic, culturally dominant ways of creating things that are actually taking us in the opposite direction of being good citizens of the universe. And I feel a little like angry and sadness at the potential that the possibility that permaculture squanders its potential by unwittingly regurgitating the same old bullshit, the same old ways of thinking and doing, with a different banner, permaculture, that ultimately is taking us away from life. When its core, its seed, its potential is so pure and beautiful. And I don't want to let that happen. So and that's what I'm holding space for, as a conversation where I don't have the answers, but I want, goddamn, have a whole lot of questions, and I'd like other people to be asking questions with me.
To have the answers would be part of that thinking that you're trying to get
exactly 100%.
So that's the whole point, and I agree completely. This way I followed your project from the beginning. I think it's amazing. It's funny, I don't know if I told you this when you were on my show, but I went to school in New South Wales. So at about 16 or 17, the local universities have the open days, and it's like, come and see the different departments. And I wanted to be an environmental engineer, I decided. And my mother said, why would you want to do that? All you do is like dig stormwater drains around business parks. And I'm like, no. I didn't know permaculture existed, right? I was 16.
Yeah.
And so we go along to the engineering department. Mother dutifully drags me, I drag her along. And we sit there, and the first slide is like, here's a stormwater drain we did around a local business park. So it's that I knew what I was looking for, which was to be a good citizen of the universe, right? And I figured environmental engineering kind of sounds like that, but no, it's literally stormwater drains. And permaculture is, orders of magnitude closer to it, and it's almost like the tragedy of it, because it gets so close.
Yeah,
you never quite find it, and if you don't do the interrogation of its philosophical shortcomings, you might leave it. And you've never been quite as close to being that good citizen, right?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, that's right, and that is the tragedy. And so much is there in place, and there's these aspects that have snuck in that aren't doing it any good. And if unless the work is done, it's not going to shift. And like Bill, I take inspiration from so many Bill Mosson's comments, and one was, don't wait for orders or permission, just partner with some friends and sort the things out you think need sorting out. And he was talking about things outside permaculture in that case, but I'm taking the same thinking and applying it to inside permaculture. I'm saying, yeah, thanks, Bill, I'm doing what you said, and I'm applying it to this beautiful, incredible contribution you made to the world, because I want it to be able to deliver on its promise, and to like deserve its relevant, or to become fully relevant to a world that's increasingly being shocked into waking up, and so that we can deliver the goods, and we're not just, and part of it is that there's a lot of other things happening in the world, and a lot of them are evolving and testing this stuff out. And the reality is permaculture will be left behind unless it does something about it. Like, nothing, no organization or organism or any living system can stay viable if it loses the capacity to evolve. And if it's not viable, at some point it's not vital. And if it's not vital, it's not around anymore. And that would be a shame.
And it's like, it's urgent. That's urgent. We're coming back to the different kind of groups. My professional background was with demography, and the younger cohort that we're talking about that shops at farmers markets and is tangentially interested in it because of, say, garden optimization, kind of know permaculture as that funny boomer hobby, right? Like they think of it as sort of the hippie tree changer thing, and that's not wrong. It certainly has that, but if that's where permaculture is stuck, then it will end, right? And
it will.
That's and I don't think it will. I think people like you doing the work, and I think people are intellectually interested. And funnily enough, these next two questions, the first one from Ruth and from Lisa, are interrelated to what we're talking about, which is this sort of baked in and unexamined solutionism. But Ruth's question, there's a lot of UK people on the call. I've heard several high-profile gardeners here in the UK say that permaculture won't work well in our climate, and that it is more suited to an Antipodean climate. Do you agree? And Lisa's question, because we'll answer them both because they're sort of the same thing. I'm begging the question here. Can you expand more on that, Dan? What aspects have snuck into permaculture? And that came through as we're talking about that sort of solutionism idea. But
so the first question is very revealing. The thinking behind the question is what interests me. The ideas behind the question, where I can't really make sense of the question unless the idea of what permaculture is that permaculture is a set of techniques and strategies, and they may work well in one part of the world or in one context or climate or culture or scale, and surely we should be careful about just picking them up and dropping them somewhere else in the world. And to me, that's part of the opportunity is for permaculture to move away from being associated or defined by a grab bag. Sometimes it's called the permaculture grab bag of techniques and strategies. So you can reach in and you pull out a swale or a chicken tractor or a chinampa or whatever. Yeah, Mandela garden, a herb spiral. And if that's what permaculture is, it's doomed. And like, the beautiful the originating impulse of permaculture was so amazing and so powerful and so radical. And it was not, let's just give the world a grab bag of clever techniques and strategies. It was this idea that we can consciously design patterns and techniques and strategies that are appropriate to wherever we apply it. And to me, that's what permaculture is, you know. And so to say if it works in Australia, great, but maybe it might not work over here you know, it requires a way of thinking about what permaculture is that I think really diminishes what permaculture is. So to me,
and I
permaculture
also
is a design approach that you can use anywhere.
I also think, yeah, I agree completely. So I know Richard Perkins likes to tease permaculture and like Jeff and say like, just put in a mango, right? And it's sort of a bit unfair. It was invented by two Australians, so it's in an arid climate. So the focus is going to be on water in that sort of situation. And not just that, then Bill spent decades building projects. He liked arid projects, right? So like he'd spent decades building them overseas and it's still going on. Like Jeff's still like got the Greening the Desert project going. So because of the interests and urgencies of some of its kind of like foundational lights, it has, if people mistake the solve for an arid climate, which is some kind of contour-based way of slowing water, if they mistake that for like a cosmic idea, then, and I feel like it's begging the question, because yes, absolutely, I'm a dual British citizen. You do not need swales in southern England. You don't, right? But that permaculture isn't swales. It's just that it was invented by people who had to find the environment appropriate response to water. And then also they liked those projects. But when you hear that in the UK, just be like, I don't believe people think that anymore. I hope anyway. I don't believe people think that permaculture really is put some mangoes on contour. I can't think that that's what people still think we are.
Yeah.
All right. But that's, to Lisa's point, solutionism in general are those ideas that are snuck in. And the other one is the engineering. It has a foundational assumption that the sort of Western materialist epistemology is correct. And some of that is Bill kind of deliberately overleaning in that direction so that it didn't get too hippie. But if you look at how it describes things, and we're using those words because unfortunately English doesn't have good words for it. Words like systems are machine-based words, right? So you're still, permaculture's way of organizing priorities on country is machine-based and solutionistic, to answer Lisa's question. That's how it sneaks in. And if you don't notice that that's there, then you don't end up, then you start to think it's actually about swales. Like you kind of miss where it's at. And those are the bits that I'm so excited about. I don't know if you want to add anything else to the answer to Lisa's question.
Yeah, I might add two things. So yeah, in terms of things that I see kind of snuck in unexamined into permaculture that are doing more damage than good. And these are two that I've explored in a bit of depth, and I'm writing a book at the moment, really drawing them out and trying to make them accessible because I think they have very, very practical implications. And the first one is this idea that the way to create something that's whole, like a WHOLE, something that's whole and complete, is to join some parts together. And even if that might sound like a weird thing to say or a bit foreign, it's actually a core underlying assumption of our entire civilization.
Has Dan's sound stopped for anyone else? It happened to me yesterday. Can you still hear me, Dan? Nod.
Yeah, I can hear you. And
all right. Yeah, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to make someone else to host because the sound dropped out for me. Keep answering the question if you can hear me. And what I will do is leave.
Maybe I'll just get someone to confirm they can hear me in the chat. So you don't just watch my lips move. Yes, okay. Yeah. So this idea that we create holes by joining parts together, which made it into permaculture. But Mollison himself thought and wrote in that way. And in a practical way, how that plays out is I walk into a design consultancy situation, and someone gives me a wish list of elements. I want a chook house, and I want a pond, and I want a food forest, and an orchard, and a wicking bed, or whatever. And when I started, I thought, oh, great, I've got my list of parts, and I'll join them together to create a whole system. And it turns out that idea comes from a machine or a mechanical way of looking at the world. And it turns out you can't build something that's genuinely whole and alive by joining separate parts together. Like think about a tree. You don't make a tree by joining together leaves and branches and a tree is an unfolding process that starts as a living whole and, well, germinates into being a living whole, and then the parts are they grow out of the whole. So that's one idea, and I've shifted that whole way of thinking into my design practice in a way that's really useful. And the other major one is this idea that design is a process, and to think, to turn the idea of design process into design procedure, and think of designing as a linear sequence of steps, where step 1, observe; step 2, design; step 3, implement; step 4, evaluate. And that whole way of thinking that you can put into a flow chart is again deeply mechanical, and it comes from ideas that were developed around how to organize machines and link them together in factories and stuff like this. And it's just not how the rest of life works. So we don't realize it, but we try and understand and build, or maybe build's the wrong word, like create living systems or enhance living systems using mechanical approaches that can only create things that were created to create things that are dead, to create machines. Yeah. And this is a big deal for me. If we're trying to use mechanical tools to create things that are non-mechanical, something's not right.
So what I tend to do with people is say, do you think you are separate from nature? Because no one in permaculture thinks that, but all our words that we bring to it, I'm like, okay, then how can you stand outside and impose a design if you're in it, right? And then I give them the Heidegger, we dwell first, then we build. Because it's, if you realize you're inseparable from it, you don't arrive on a property, construct something, and then live in it, right? You're actually, the dwelling and arranging and relating happens in the course of that flow. And that is fundamental, because the permaculture process doesn't do that. As you say, the permaculture process as described doesn't do that.
Yeah. I love this side. One of the Joel Glansberger colleague, who's related to Carol's work, he talks about how the way a river forms isn't that it's not like you dig the river bed out and then turn the water on and let it flow down the river. The river formed with the flowing of the water over long periods of time. So it's like it's not like you master plan your whole property and what's going to happen each year for the next 20 years and then like turn the life on and impose the plan on the landscape or the map on the territory. You start living there, and you get to know the place, and you start to make some interventions and see what happens, and the evolution evolves and begins. And some people might say, yeah, that's what I do already. And actually quite often I talk about the stuff and people come up and say, thanks so much, Dan, thanks for affirming what I've always done. And isn't that what we do in permaculture anyway? I'm like, have you read any books about permaculture? Where it's very clear that these mechanistic ways of thinking are still in there. And even when there's attempts to move in more living directions than like ideas of nested holes and stuff, we're still at a pretty low level. Like we actually literally use mechanical ideas and give the example of a wheel inside a car, inside a road system or something. We're just so deeply biased towards the language of machines.
Yeah, that's funny. The Greeks didn't. The Greeks managed to corral that thinking and describe it as a specific kind of thinking, and we've just dropped that, right? So we had techne when we were talking about machine thinking. It's not that machine thinking is wrong; it's just that it doesn't describe the universe. And if you're kind of going for like cosmic thinking, but we don't. So Donna Haraway is one of my favorite intellectuals, and she says, "Go outside English, and the wild multiplies." And that's it. It's not even like a ragging on this particular language. It's, if you don't know that the words, if you don't know that you're caught in this semiotic trap, it's very difficult to get out. And coming back to your point of people saying, thank you for affirming, isn't this what we do? It's like, on the one hand, yes, because you can't not. I think Heidegger's point of like, we dwell first, then we build. And it being in more of that flow model is, yes, it's true. I think you are always in that model, and we are improperly describing it in a machinistic way. But then the point is, from a nodal intervention perspective, imagine what might happen if we just didn't. If we just kind of optimized the way, if we matched the way we spoke about it to the way we we can't not do it anyway, what would the net energy effects of that be, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. It's a good way of putting it. Yeah, that's come up with the conversation around, we need to reconnect with nature. It was like, if you were separate, like genuinely separate from nature, you'd be dead really fast, or from the rest of the atmosphere and the ecologies. It's more that we've talked and thought our way into thinking that we're separate. And if we could bring that back in line with the reality that we're not, would be all good.
Yeah. Probably my favorite author in the world is Ursula Le Guin, and she's famous for a bunch of books, including The Disposition. And there's a line from the kind of anarchist culture hero Odo in it: to be whole is to be apart. And that's kind of like and also with you of the anarchism of the planet. And I like that. To be whole is to be apart. It's a wordplay, but it's also exactly what we're talking about here, because we can't otherwise discuss it. It's very difficult to even talk about nested contexts without, as you say, going with wheel, car, road, freeway system, whatever. Like, it's a challenge, and it's funny once you get people's heads around it. The light goes on. Jay has a really cool question. Given how far Dan's thinking has come since he published it, does he think unfolding is now or less a more important process than the graphic he created suggests at first glance?
Let me see. Can I get access to this?
Yeah. Just click on the Q&A.
Okay. Given how far Dan's thinking has come since he published it, does he think unfolding is now now or less a more important process than the graphic he created?
I guess it's like, would you prioritize unfolding to the same amount post Carol, maybe?
Oh, right. Well, if that's the question, yeah. Like I see them as completely aligned. Yeah. So I'm still massively inspired by and influenced by Christopher Alexander. And one thing I find Carol stuff really powerful and deep and really useful in terms of thinking and framing the whole thing, but it in no way to me contradicts or shifts my focus on using an approach to the practicalities of actually designing and shaping spaces and places, drawing on the work of Christopher Alexander and others, which is not that, that's not a specific interest of Carol's.
Yeah, sure. Very cool. So I want to finish it on a note of, we spoke about, we've given people book suggestions and so on. Like, what are the things that you want to see most immediately in permaculture? What do you think where is the urgency? I'm going to try and, I've asked you that question. I'm going to try and work out if I have an answer to that myself. I'm not sure I do.
Well, I'm just using some of Carol's stuff. He's going to be mentioned a lot. I've reached a new level of clarity in terms of my understanding of what this project, Making Permaculture Stronger, is about for the next while, probably the next several years. And it used to be collaboratively, well, at the very beginning, it was like strengthening permaculture's weak links or something, and that's long gone. And it more recently was collaboratively developing permaculture's potential, which still rings true, but I realize it's pretty general and vague. And specifically what I'm getting at with that is this, I'm calling it regenerating permaculture design process together. So this idea of going back to the core and the originating impulse of what permaculture is and where it came from, and then collaboratively redeveloping and rediscovering and regenerating a design and a way of thinking about design process, where design process, by the way, is not just some little interesting subset of permaculture. Whenever we do anything in the world, and whenever we do anything towards any kind of permaculture, there's a process involved. And so we're all designing and creating using a process every single day. And what I really want to invite and hold space for and have idea companions and practice companions on is starting to reflect and pay attention and notice and develop this stuff and collaborate to make nodal interventions inside permaculture and to start to shift the way this stuff is taught on permaculture design courses and written about in books and practiced by designers. And it's, the conversation is happening, and I've got a bit of stamina. And so that will be the invitation, even just to start paying attention. Oh, okay, how do I think about design process? And even if I'm not a professional designer, when I'm doing something new in my garden, what's my approach? And how do the holes come first or fast? Or do I do a plan? Or am I a thinker or a feeler or both, or just start to ask questions and talk about it with others? And I think this is fundamentally important work.
Yeah, I like that. I think my version of it would be quite similar, and it's in the sense of I want people to interrogate the foundational assumptions, because the other thing I notice is, and I mean, I'm a classic example of it because we worked for a decade to get to this context that we're in now, but if I could go back 10 years or more, I would say permaculture doesn't begin when you get on country. Like it's that, well, how do I do design? Like if you realize that it's about being in a flourishing or relational context with your whole life, right? Then it applies wherever. You could live in a small apartment in Hong Kong, and if you're doing it right, in the sense of the metaphysics should scale up and down. And I think that's the bit, rather than a permaculture being some garden tactics and then maybe one day I'll do a tree change. It's what you said about design. It's actually, if you do it right, it's how you live, I guess.
Yeah. I'm really excited to think that we could collaboratively develop our design process awareness and literacy and ability to teach and communicate. Because to me, that's going to be the most important thing when the next series of disruptions come in the pipeline. What is our ability to adapt and design real solutions in the moment, and not just to say, oh, we need to put lots of swales in or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. One last question, then we'll ask what you got going on, because I'm surprised it hasn't come up. It comes up every time, but Helen's got, is Western permaculture currently a middle-class pursuit? I would say worldwide permaculture is. I know there was some pushback when retro suburbia started, which is unfair when if you know David and Sue, you would struggle to find people less aware of the disadvantaged in any kind of context, right? But he picked retro suburbia because most humans in Australia live in a suburban context. So if you're looking to make maximal change, it's something that permaculture unaddressed. But some of the pushback I know at some of the events was around like, what about, isn't it middle class to be talking about suburbs? And like, it is, but it's also where most of our like domestic energy expenditure and whatever is used. So it's a conversation that needs to happen. When it interacts in places like the Greening the Desert project, it's still middle class there. I don't think it is exclusively middle class. It kind of comes back to the cohorts where there are people involved in this great ecosystem of permaculture that are super into some deep theory stuff, and there are people who are optimizing gardening but it's funny. I think it's something that I actually think permaculture's initial perspective or interaction with other cultures that it was based on. So Bill in particular sort of extracted a whole bunch of gardening and agricultural techniques from across space and time, like other cultures, and put them together, right? And you go, it's a bit out of step with how we do cross-cultural engagement in the 21st century, to be perfectly honest. Like, just I'll have that, right? And I think this comes down to the foundational assumptions of permaculture is built around evolution, so we can move past it, but it's there. I don't know, what do you think? Do you think is it fair to call it a middle-class pursuit, or does it just have like a middle-class origin point? I don't know.
Well, no, yeah, no, it resonates. So, yeah, I'd probably even maybe go further as well and say that, I mean, I'm aware of a lot of incredible people doing all sorts of things in different countries, but by and large, in Australia and New Zealand, I would say that it's kind of like careful with my language here, but something like a hobby, a hobby for relatively privileged white people.
It's a bit bougie.
Yeah, it's a luxury. People dabble and fool around with it, and that could become, well, maybe it already is a real issue and limiting factor, and something that I think is really important to look at. And it is one frontier that I'm kind of taking a deep breath towards taking a sniff at, is this whole topic of decolonizing permaculture, which is like, I know it's like such a minefield and loaded and triggering, but it, you know, relates to this. And I would hate to see, yeah, permaculture just sort of shrivel up into being an optional hobby for middle class Westerners.
Yeah. Well,
And
we'll
at
stay
the
in
same
touch.
time, I think it's you know, it's not that it should exclude them, but it would be a shame if that became its center of gravity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I described it to you. One of the things I liked about Bill was he self-funded international aid projects by selling a gardening information product to middle-class Australians. And so you think, well, the target market had to be middle class because he needed, and in the back of his book is this kind of tax avoidance scheme for how you can fund a non-profit to go and do all this work. So there's good heart behind it, but like we have to be in the context that we are, which is, yeah, it can be a bit bougie because optimizing one's garden has been a bougie pursuit since we've had English gardens for 400 years. You know, it doesn't need to be. And the decolonizing thing is one of those foundational steps of the metaphysics. But there's no point, or there's no sense pretending otherwise, I guess. I don't know.
No, totally. Yeah. I saw another question there about, is there much going on at the intersection of permaculture as a hobby or industry? Yep. And Indigenous communities and their knowledge / wisdom / sovereignty. And I know of a little bit that's happening in New Zealand, but I'm personally not aware of a whole lot. And it's a topic I've got kind of, I think it's a really important fish to fry. I've also got other fish to fry. And that said, it is something that I am starting to attend to more. And I mean, it's of course at this moment, cultural and historical moment, it's an increasingly relevant.
Yeah, there's more.
Topic.
There's more than you think.
Okay.
Less than we'd like, I would say.
Yeah.
I think
yeah.
when it comes to, particularly in an urban context, the investment in sort of Indigenous projects in Australia will always include some kind, like you'll see the permaculture principles applied to rooftop gardens and so on. I know some Kiwi projects. Sarah, so do you. That's Kiwi Charles's project. Sarah's one of the site members. So they're there. It is a inevitable overlap, and this is a good thing. Like we spoke about permaculture having middle class DNA. It also has this because of Bill. Like. And David actually, but in an exclusively more or less Australian context. But Bill had that. Bill would do self-funded projects with Aboriginal Australia, with India. It's definitely there. And that's one of the things that I think when it goes looking for it goes on its journey of decolonization, I think it's to remember those stories. I think it's to go, actually, we did. and some of it's there. I would view that as a positive.
What was I going to say? Oh yeah, just people might be curious to or interested to look up. There's a woman working in the States. She's a activist farmer looking at justice in the food system. But anyway, she's got some great stuff on YouTube. Lee Penniman from Soulfire Farm, and I'm hoping we're teeing up an interview in, I don't know, in a month or so. But I watched some of her YouTubes, really disruptive, really confronting, really well informed, and speaking a lot about the relationship of permaculture to, well, she doesn't talk about that much, but she alludes to permaculture, but exploring the role of and the relationship between Indigenous practices and peoples and lands and everything to modern farming and also permaculture.
Lisa's question, it's funny, that's sort of like it doesn't work in the Northern Hemisphere. You can say that permaculture predates Bill and David if you think it's a collection of techniques. So I actually kind of have a line in the sand there where I'm like, no, they invented it. But it is, and this is, you know, the good and the bad of it, it is an assemblage of pre-existing techniques towards a very specific solve that they came upon. But yeah, swales predate, you know, all of this stuff predates, no dig gardening and so on. But if you consider it nothing but an assemblage of techniques, and generally when people say, I find, this is being cynical, but it's been my experience, when people say that permaculture predates Bill and David, they're trying to sell you their own thing. I think it's important that we stand behind that as its origin point, while recognizing it is built of things that certainly predated. I don't know. What do you think?
Oh, I think it's really interesting one. Yeah, it's something I'm exploring, and it's the upcoming interview with David Holmgren is really relevant to this. But one we're thinking about is I've been learning a bit about the actual conversation, the seed in which the seed of permaculture was created. It was a conversation between Bill Mollison and David Holmgren. David was saying, "Hey, Bill, I've got to figure out what I'm doing for my thesis next year." I think it was in 1974. And Bill said, "Okay, what about this?" And David had already identified the space he was interested in was the overlap between ecology, agriculture, and design. And Bill gave him this idea of exploring perennial tree crops-based agriculture, which was and from that conversation, permaculture germinated. And this relates to some stuff I've learned from Christopher Alexander. So on the one hand, any traditional sustainable civilization or culture had to exist in the not the overlap between ecology and agriculture, but their agriculture had to be nested within. Their agriculture had to be nested within their culture, had to be nested in with the ecologies they were part of, or they didn't exist. And yet the whole idea of conscious design didn't exist then. It was unconscious design and unself-conscious design. And so one thing that I think is new about permaculture, it's a new way of getting to an old place in a sense, but it's the idea of using conscious design as a conscious process to get back to a place where our agriculture is nested and our culture is nested in the living ecologies of the earth. And that, it's not to say it's all new, and so much of it is about getting back to where we were, but this idea of conscious design I think is new and does mark a transition.
I would say so. I mean, yeah, I was just thinking as you were talking, like cob. Cob has been around for a while. You know what I mean? Yeah. They didn't invent cob, but I think this is all really, really fruitful stuff to happen in permaculture's development. And to that end, Dan, it's been a great chat. But tell people about the show and where they can find it, and what else you've got going on. I hear tell of a book.
Yes, well, yeah, a bit going on, but the project this chat's been associated with is Making Permaculture Stronger, which is at makingpermaculturestronger.net. So there's a podcast there. I'm putting out a weekly episode at the moment, and I'm not writing so many blog posts at the moment because I'm putting I've got 3 amazing volunteers helping me put together the first Making Permaculture Stronger book, which should hopefully we're aiming to have that off to the printers by December. And there's also a growing community of supporters, not expecting anyone to join, but it's an option. There's a Patreon community where we're part of that. Is every 6 weeks we have a gathering, about 20 of us come together, and we're exploring this stuff, living this stuff, becoming more conscious and aware about our design processes and developing the ideas together, which is a lot of fun. Yeah, I mean, there's other websites and stuff, but Making Permaculture Stronger is a pretty good place to start. Yeah.
Definitely want to point people in that direction. Well, all right. So this has been a great chat. I was super looking forward to it, and some really good questions. So, and everyone, whenever I do these, I get really jealous because I'm not in the chat because I'm talking, and I see it go through, and I'm like, oh,
yeah. It'd be great to see what everyone's chatting about. I saw some flashing at the beginning about sounding like swapping gardening tips, and I was conscious it may have been some people showed up. They're like, "What the hell is this? Metaphysics?" I came here to learn about my fruit fly issues in the bloody orchard. So thanks for bearing
the rest of the season. I wanted to start with the big theory one, but the rest of the winter webinar series for Permaculture Tasmania is very tactical stuff. The next one's seed saving for everyone who's in the chat.
There we go.
And then there'll be preserving and poultry and all the kind of classics.
Oh, well, that's going to more than make up for all this.
Exactly. All right, guys. Well, again, Dan, always good to catch up. Thank you very much.
Yeah, great to see you again, Gordon. Thank you. Great. Yeah, it was great fun.